The desert didn't roar. It rasped, a slow, scraping sound, like bone on rust. Sand whispered along the cracked basin, filling boot prints almost as fast as they were made. The heat didn't come from the sun. It came from below, radiating up through the dry, flat rock, like the ground itself wanted to burn them away. 5 figures moved across it in loose formation. Lex took point, rifle loose in hand, his eyes on the distant ridgelines. Behind him, Silas walked in silence, jaw locked, the dried blood still etched in his coat from the Rustbrook siege. Dane trailed slightly to the right, scanning flanks with the detached calm of a man ready to kill at any moment. Claire moved behind him, muttering to herself over a cracked datapad, and Orianthe watched the sky more than the ground. "I've got static on the upper band again," Claire said, flicking a dial. "Not from us. Something's bleeding across the relay lines." "No signal?" Silas asked. "Nothing clean?" "Good. That means no one's tracking us yet." "Yet," Lex muttered from the front. "Always a yet with you." They trudged in silence another hour before they found the remains of the half-buried vehicle. Probably a freighter, civilian make. The rear axle was torn halfway out of the frame and the cabin had been gutted. "Scavenged already?" Dane asked. Lex shook his head. "No, ripped apart. Not human hands. Marrow beasts? Too clean. Maybe something smarter." They didn't linger. Just enough time to strip a few weapon mounts and check the undercarriage. Claire opened a locker and found food supplies, half melted, reeking. The water bloated with bacterial slime. "Delightful," she muttered, kicking it shut. "Even the rats passed on this buffet." Orianthe ran a quick scan on the vehicle's black box. "Dead?" Hardwired feedback loop. Whoever did this wanted it to stay buried. Silas didn't speak. He simply stared at the sand, dragging back over the tread marks, like the desert wanted the evidence erased. The sun dipped low by the time the creatures came. They weren't large, maybe waist-high, but fast. Striped hides, jagged spines, and teeth that clicked like snapping cables. "Contacts, 2 o'clock, Lex barked, rifle up. 3 of them. No, 5. The group fanned out. Silas took point, flanking left. Dane went right, cutting the lead beast's charge with a single surgical shot. The thing rolled mid-air and landed twitching. Claire fired next. 2 bursts from her sidearm, driving the second into retreat. But the third didn't flinch. It lunged straight at Lex, jaws wide, eyes glassy. Lex ducked under the leap and drove his blade into its gut mid-spin, slamming it into the ground in a heap of dust and wet. "Clear," Dane called. The rest froze, scanned, listened. Nothing, just silence and wind. Claire knelt beside one. "You ever seen this species?" Orianthe shook her head. "Not in any of the eastern quadrants. Could be post-fall mutation. Or manufactured," Dane said quietly. "No implants," Claire countered. "Just rage." They moved on. Night caught them 2 hours later. The cold came fast in the desert. Burning heat flipped to biting chill like someone throwing a switch. They found shelter beside a cracked mesa, setting a rough camp between 2 stone ribs. Lex set a perimeter. Claire started a fire with the scavenged wiring and a plasma spark. Dane began rechecking ammo, methodical and wordless. Orianthe spread out a small tarp and laid her salvage blueprints on it, drawings from the relay network's western spine. Silas sat near her, but not too close. "You think it's intact?" he asked. "The relay?" She nodded once. "The map says it is, but I don't know what's listening through it." "We need it," he said. "If we want a line back west." "I know." Her tone was flat, unreadable. Claire tossed a protein ration to Lex and sat beside Dane. "We should take shifts tonight. Double watch." "Always do," he said. "But, yeah, especially now. You think those creatures were random?" "Nothing's random anymore." Before anyone could sleep, Lex paused in mid-step and whispered, "Wait." A soft groan rolled across the canyon, low, organic, too slow to be wind. Everyone stopped. Claire held her breath. Dane's eyes narrowed. "That's not marrow beasts," he muttered. Silas rose and moved to Orianthi's side. "What's out there?" She didn't look up from the sand, where she was lightly drawing the relay design with her fingertip. "I don't know, but the pattern of movement, it's rhythmic. It's either marching or pulsing." "Neither is good," Claire said. "No," Dane agreed, voice like a stone against leather. "It means something's organizing or waking." Silas scanned the firelit camp. His people. Tired, frayed, and still standing, we double the watch. If it's nothing, we lose sleep. If it's something, we're ready, Lex said. He grinned without humor and pulled his rifle closer. "Besides, if I don't shoot something soon, I might start eyeing you lot." A chuckle passed between them. Not much, but enough. Hours passed. Claire and Dane's shift moved in silence, broken only by the occasional rustle of wind through shattered stone. Claire crouched beside a pile of bleached bones and sketched a few lines into her notebook. Not drawings, notes, signal shifts, relay interference, creature behavior. Dane glanced over. "Why not sleep when you're off duty?" she shrugged. "Because the minute I do, something will crawl up from the sand and eat my boots." He allowed a quiet breath of amusement. "Fair." Claire tapped her pencil against the pad. "You ever think it's all just loops? This war, the scavenging, the ghosts?" Dane didn't answer. Then, after a beat, "Only every day," Silas stayed up longer than he meant to. Watching Orianthi, the fire, the stars, the ache in his shoulder pulsed like a second heartbeat. He thought of Rustbrook, the smell of its market before the fires, the laughter that used to echo from the water tanks, Miriam's voice barking orders half a mile away. He missed it more than he admitted. Orianthi finally spoke, her voice as low as the wind. "You're not sleeping." "I don't like what's out there." "You think it'll follow us?" He hesitated. "No, I think it's already ahead." She closed the blueprints. "Then let's be the ones who walk into it with our eyes open." They sat together a moment longer. Beyond the canyon wall, the desert whispered, the sound of something that hadn't yet forgotten them. Just after midnight, Dane paused mid-step on a patrol and signaled Claire to halt. She crouched instinctively, following his gaze to a sloped ridge, silhouetted in the starlight. Something moved, low, crawling. Not fast, not noisy, but deliberate. A shifting trail in the dust, long and segmented. Like a snake, but dragging. He raised his scope. There was nothing there, only empty sand and a thin shimmer, like heat distortion, pulsing once, then gone. Claire whispered, "Did you see that?" "Nothing I could name," Dane said, "but it left a trail." They marked the spot, then returned to camp. At the fire's edge, Lex adjusted the barrel, salvaged from the rover, setting it into a rough sling. He worked quietly, but his eyes flicked often to the dark beyond the flame. Orianthi hadn't moved in a while. She sat with the blueprint open once more, tracing invisible patterns in the dirt. Silas moved beside her. "You should sleep." "I will." "You're reading things in those lines, aren't you?" She looked up. "Yes. And I don't know if I should be." "What do you see?" "A map that loops, like it wants to fold back on itself. And in the center, a mark. Not military, not tech. Something older." Silas looked down. The drawing in the dirt was not technical. It was geometric, symmetrical, sharp lines coiled into a jagged spiral. He wiped it away with his boot. "No cults," he said flatly. "Not again?" Orianthe didn't argue. Claire and Dane returned and gave their report. No creatures seen, but the trail remained. Lex took first watch with Silas. The others settled in, restless in the warmth of a fire that no longer felt protective. In the distance, the wind shifted, a long, soft, metallic tone, like wind blowing through the writh of a dead machine. Lex cocked his head. "You hear that?" Silas nodded. "Yeah." Neither moved. Just two men, listening to a sound that had no business being alive out here. Dane lit a small flare at the canyon's edge, not out of necessity, just habit. He watched the slow, steady burn for a moment before tossing the dead shell into a pocket. Claire raised an eyebrow. "You always burn one?" "Every time I bunk somewhere new," he said. "If I see the flare in a dream, I know I'm not dreaming." She blinked. "That's weirdly clever and kind of sad." Dane didn't reply. Orianthe had finally laid down, but not before slipping the blueprints under her makeshift bedroll. Silas stood nearby, glancing once more toward the dark horizon. "Do you ever think we'll see Rustbrook again?" Claire asked from beside him. Silas didn't answer right away. "Only if we make it matter that we left." He crouched to tighten the straps on his gear. "If this is all just for running, then no. We won't deserve to." Claire watched him for a moment longer, then turned toward her bedroll. Before sleep took them, another sound stirred in the distance. Not claws, not skittering, something like breathing. Slow, measured, mechanical. Lex muttered, "That's not marrow beasts." Dane's fingers wrapped around the grip of his rifle. "No, that's a machine trying to sound like it's alive." Silas stepped away from the firelight, scanning the darkness. "Either way, it knows we're here." He looked back at his team, scarred, tired, half-broken, and felt that tight coil in his chest again. But he didn't speak it aloud. They would reach Gravepoint, or they wouldn't. Chapter 2. Dust Signals. The desert didn't end so much as hesitate. The winds fell still as the basin opened before them, revealing Gravepoint, a town that looked like it had been dropped from the sky and barely survived the landing. It wasn't large, but it was dense, tangled. It carried the kind of silence that wasn't peace, but the pressure of watching eyes. Gravepoint had been many things. A rest stop before the fall, a trade depot for the Western Line, a boneyard after the fires. Now it was something else, a surviving thing, a body that refused to die. Its four main zones had grown up around the wrecked train lines: the core spine, the rims, the rail bones, and the East Bastion. The spine was the heart, a market strip packed with barter stalls, grease-stained fabric roofs, and hand-painted signs that meant everything and nothing. People here didn't speak loudly. They weighed their words like ammo. One wrong trade could ruin you. The air stank of welding grease, smoked root, and scorched plastic. It never quite cleared. Brass wind chimes made from spent cartridges clinked softly in the breeze like a warning, whispered too late. Wint Malik walked this zone like he owned the dirt. Tall, narrow, with a face that looked like it had never smiled properly. He controlled permits, supplies, and most importantly, food rations. No one knew exactly how he kept it all balanced. Some said blackmail. Others said deals with the Black Luswine traders underground. Most just kept their heads down. When he passed, people leaned away instinctively, even if he hadn't looked at them. Yorick Vale, by contrast, ran quiet. He commanded the militia with soft orders and clear eyes. He had a scar down his throat from before the fall and never raised his voice. He didn't need to. His men obeyed because they trusted him and feared what Gravepoint would become without him. Yorick kept the bastion clean, the patrols sharp, and went in check. Mostly, his presence steadied things, like the weight of a loaded rifle on a table during an argument. But Gravepoint was more than two men. The Railbones was the forgotten zone, an old maintenance yard converted into labs, shops, and scrap silos. Here the steel creaked like tired lungs, and wind howled through gaps in the metal. It was here that the two engineers, Dre and Lysa, worked, argued, and refused to cooperate with anyone not holding parts or offering silence. Dre was ex-military, hard to approach. Lysa was younger, her mind too quick to hold still. She'd been tracking frequencies lately, swore something was moving underground. 3 of her contacts, signal rats, had gone missing near the old relay. She'd warned them not to go alone. They hadn't listened. One came back, barely 13, name unknown. Wouldn't speak, not even to Lysa. She didn't push him. She just took the shard he offered. Black, translucent, pulsing with low, sickly light, and placed it on her bench under a dome scanner. The pulse wasn't regular. It beat like a damaged heart. It made the metal in her bench vibrate at odd intervals. The bench bolts began to loosen. One cracked, and Lysa stared at it for a full minute before realizing her hand had gone numb. The boy sat motionless by the corner of the lab, knees pulled tight to his chest, eyes darting to the shard every few seconds. When she tried to feed him, he flinched at sudden movement. Lysa's hands trembled more than she expected when she adjusted the scanner focus. She didn't even realize she was whispering to herself, echoing numbers and waveforms that hadn't been stable since the last power cycle. She caught herself staring at the shard too long, breath held, like it might whisper back. Mazrik, the broker, came that same night. He didn't knock. He never did. "You know what that is?" he asked. His voice was dry, stripped of curiosity. "Just a test." Lysa didn't answer. He stared at the shard for a long moment, then whispered something the boy couldn't hear. His expression didn't shift, but his shoulders lowered just slightly, like surrender or preparation. "Don't let Wint see it," he said, and left. He didn't say goodbye. Meanwhile, the town's routine stumbled on. In the core spine, 2 families clashed over water rights. Someone had sabotaged the Western collector pipe. Yorick's men arrested both sons, but Wint insisted on holding the father until the trade season passed. It wasn't justice. It was leverage. A 3rd family offered to replace the pipe if they could take the old family's ration slot. Yorick refused. Wint didn't. In the rims, an older scaver named Torley had set up a shadow market, selling copper and old alcohol out of a coffin-shaped case he rolled through alleys. The militia looked the other way. For now, rumor said he traded in relics, too. Things no one wanted to admit existed. Then Torley vanished. One morning, the slag pits near the Railbones went quiet. A worker screamed. They found something in the cooling runoff. Twisted, burned, fused with melted copper and scrap wiring. No one could say for sure who it was, but Lysa recognized the fragment of Torley's coat. Yorick closed off the site. Wint called it an accident and issued no statement. No one touched the remains. No one claimed them. The air above the slag shimmered oddly. Someone said the corpse hummed when they tried to move it. That night, a pair of scavers tried to sneak into the site. Only one came back. She didn't speak, just dropped her gear on the spine steps and walked east until she vanished into the haze. Lysa didn't sleep. She kept a wrench under her cot. For the first time in years, she locked the lab door. Every night, the wind brought a hum to the railbones. Lysa recorded it. Masric mapped it. Yorek felt it in the screws of his desk drawer. A patrolman said his sidearm discharged by itself that evening. No witnesses. A welder claimed the fire arc from his torch made a shape, a triangle inside a circle, just before cutting out. Neither of them said it aloud, but they knew the truth. The shard was reacting to something out there, calling to it, or answering, and something was coming. Soon. Chapter 3. The approach, morning in Gravepoint, broke over taut nerves. The body in the slag pit hadn't stopped humming. It was a low, persistent sound, barely audible but felt more than heard, like the town itself had been wounded and was trying to whisper the pain away. By now, the edges of the fused corpse had cooled, but the surrounding area was cordoned off and eerily avoided. Masric circled it from afar, noting not the body, but the patterns around it. Scraped grooves, burned ash in curves, geometric, intentional. There was a rhythm to the symbols that made his stomach tighten, though he couldn't say why. He made a slow mark in the corner of his notebook and slipped away before the patrols could ask questions. Yorek stood nearby, arms folded. He hadn't slept. The scar at his throat twitched as he clenched his jaw. A flicker of unease passed behind his steady eyes as he watched Wint approach. Wint's expression was as unmoved as ever, mask-like, unreadable, as if nothing could startle him anymore. "Militia wants to know what we're calling it," Yorek said, not looking away from the sight. "An accident," Wint replied. "You think that's going to hold?" Wint shrugged. "Long enough. Someone melted a man into steel. That's not accidental." "Then start an investigation," Wint said flatly. "I'm not stopping you. Just don't expect it to matter." Within the hour, the spine was rippling with tension. Half the market, vendors, wanted answers. The other half didn't want to talk about it. The few who had traded with Torley grew quiet, guarded. One man tried to pawn a knife he said came from Torley's cart. Yorek had him detained and posted 2 patrolmen near the cart's last known location. By midday, the body was still unidentified. Lysa had disappeared back into the railbones with the boy and the shard. Dre hadn't emerged from his silo lab at all. Masric left no traces, just his shadow on the edge of things. Small rumors began to take root. Whispers of cursed salvage, of the old relay's shadow stretching into the town, of something drawn to the shard's pulse. Superstition and tension fed one another like sparks in dry brush. A widow named Mirren crossed herself 3 times and closed her tailor stall. A few slag pit workers refused to return, claiming the humming followed them home. In the rims, someone scrawled a spiral symbol on the wall of the old grain shack. No one admitted to it, but no one painted over it either. Near the healer's den, a girl began sketching symbols she couldn't explain. Lydia Keller locked the sketchbook away. Behind closed doors, people talked. Some feared another relay event. Others feared the truth behind Torley's death. At the perimeter, the militia ran silent drills. The sound of boots echoed beneath the spine. The town had the feel of something bracing. Yorek pressed a thumb to his comm and called for Masric. No answer. He tried again. Nothing. He glanced toward the railbones, then toward the black sky boiling at the edge of the east horizon. Something didn't sit right. Not just fear, something older. Then came the alert. A guard on East Bastion spotted movement through binocs. At first just dust trails, then shapes, tall, moving with purpose. Eyes on a group, the guard said into his comm. 5, maybe 6, armed. No insignia. Moving tight, like ex-Mill or Mercs. He paused. Not raiders, gears too clean. Another voice chimed in over comms, nervous but composed. They're making no effort to hide. They're just coming. Yorick arrived at the tower within minutes. He took the binocs, swept the ridgeline, then narrowed his eyes. He saw them, marching through the heat shimmer, headed straight for Gravepoint. No banner, but no attempt to hide either. Purposeful, controlled. He passed the binocs back. Raised the alarm, bastion protocol. Alarms rang across the spine. Autocannons clicked into life. Shields on the outer gate shimmered faintly. Militia scrambled. Vendors slammed shutters. Children disappeared into buildings. A woman in the rims pulled a flare from a drawer and lit it in silence. 2 signal rats scrambled up a comm tower and vanished into the ventways. Gravepoint held its breath. Out in the desert, Silas Kane lowered his scope. Gravepoint rose like a rust-blotched fortress, ugly, layered, watching. "So that's it," said Lex. "Looks bigger than I thought." "It'll feel smaller once we're inside," Silas said, voice dry. Charon checked his scatter beam's charge. Nadia stared up at the clouds. Orianthe studied the outer wall. "They see us. Let them," Silas replied. "Think they'll open the gates?" Lex asked. "Eventually." "Should we circle west?" Charon asked. No, Silas said. "We come direct. We come seen." The group moved forward, dust in their wake. No deception. No masks. Just intent. Back in Gravepoint, Wint arrived at the bastion. "Well?" he asked. Yorick didn't answer right away. "They're coming in strong, but not hostile. Not yet. And if that changes?" Yorick's voice was calm. "Then we greet them properly." Wint studied the party through the binocs, squinting slightly. "That's Silas Kane. He's been dead twice already." Yorick exhaled through his nose. "Let's hope it doesn't make a third." Elsewhere, a scaver buried a token under ash. A child woke from a dream, crying about machines without faces. Somewhere in the railbones, under humming lights, the shard pulsed once. Just once. Enough to make the boy flinch. Enough to make the scanner restart. Masrick watched from the shadows, eyes narrowed, lips mouthing something silently. Something was coming. And now, it had a name. Chapter 4. The gate, the outer wall of Gravepoint, loomed closer with each step, its oxidized panels glinting beneath a pale sun. The town's defenses bristled like a wounded animal. Turrets tracked their movement, and figures moved along the parapets, half-seen shadows behind armored slats. The gates remained sealed, but the air hummed with tension and the faint electric buzz of targeting sensors. Silas held up a closed fist. The party stopped. Orianthe shifted beside him, her fingers brushing the grip of her weapon. "They're watching every step we take. If they meant to shoot, they would have. Unless they're waiting for a reason," Lex muttered, eyes never leaving the wall. Charon turned his head slowly, scanning the ridgelines. No snipers in sight. Doesn't mean they're not there. Nadia crouched low, dragging a gloved finger through the dust. Too clean, like the ground's been disturbed recently. They've reinforced since the last trade group passed through. "This place smells like fear." Silas took a slow breath. "We're not raiders." "They know that. The uniforms, the way we march, it's all saying organized. Let's make sure that's the story they hear." He stepped forward alone, 10 paces, and stopped. Above the gate, a small platform extended. A woman with a scoped rifle leaned out. "Names?" she called. "Silas Kane. With me are Lex, Charon, Nadia, and Orianthe. Wish from Rustbrook." A murmur passed behind the walls. The woman hesitated, then tapped something on her comm. Another voice rang out, male, gravelly. "Pause." Then, "Wait." 10 long seconds passed. 20. The gates clunked, hissed, and parted just enough to reveal a narrow entry corridor lined with militia. Silas nodded to the others. "Let's move." As the group stepped into the threshold, wary eyes followed them. Weapons weren't raised, but they weren't relaxed either. The corridor smelled of rust, gun oil, and tension. A tall man with a command badge stood at the far end, arms folded like twin steel beams. "Yorek Val," he said without preamble. "We've got protocols, and you're late to all of them." Orianthe stepped forward, measured but poised. "We're not here to break protocol. We need a place to sleep and speak. You'll get one, but you'll leave your weapons at the gate." The words hung heavy. Lex let out a low whistle. "You sure you can store them properly? These aren't scrap rifles." Nadia muttered, "Some of this gear's worth more than the town." Silas didn't blink. "Let them log it. Tag it, but it stays with us. I'm not handing over tech that took years to salvage just because someone's nervous." Yorick didn't flinch. "Then you're not getting past this corridor." Tension prickled. The militia shifted. Charon flexed a hand near his scatter beam. Orianthe spoke, voice calm but steel-edged. "We'll compromise. Lock the armory. Post your men on us if you have to. But we don't disarm in the wastes." Yorick stared for a moment. "We'll hold them in internal checkpoint 6. One entry, no exits but ours. You'll be watched." Silas nodded once. "Fine. We've been watched before." As they were escorted through the checkpoint, Orianthe slowed, her gaze drifting toward the ground beneath them. Her hand hovered for a moment near the grip of her pistol. Not in alarm, but in quiet instinct. "Something's pulling," she muttered under her breath. Lex glanced at her. "What?" She didn't answer right away. Her eyes tracked along the metal corridor floor, the way the wiring curved unnaturally at the seams. Something here wants to be found. A strange pressure prickled at the back of her mind, like a whisper too soft to catch, but persistent. A memory surfaced. The relay station, that same hum before the machines woke. Minutes later, as they passed a narrow service hall, Orianthe paused, turning her head toward a reinforced bulkhead down the side corridor. A faint hum reached her ears, too low for the others to hear. She took a step toward it. "You can't go there," barked a nearby guard, snapping his rifle up halfway. "Restricted zone." Silas stepped between them quickly. "Orianthe," she blinked as if waking from a trance. "I didn't mean to. Just later," he said, voice firm. "Not here, not now." She gave him a faint nod, clearly shaken. Her hand lingered at her side, as if something unseen had tugged her inward. Lex watched her carefully but said nothing. They were led into a rusted decontum chamber, checked for weapons, radiation identifiers. The scans passed clean. Inside, the spine buzzed with tension. Civilians peered from corners. A few whispered, then a voice cut through it. "Wait, that's Kane? And her? I know her for sure. They're from Rustbrook." A grizzled trader approached, eyes squinting. "Lex, right? Trapper's squad. You came through here last winter." Lex nodded, face stony. Others joined. Familiar faces, past allies, cautious hope. But not everyone welcomed them. Some turned away. Others muttered. "They brought trouble, that's what." "Don't matter if they're known. They're marked now. You see that spiral?" The group was given a room. Bare metal, locked from the outside. But for now, it was shelter. The air inside was dry and slightly metallic. Silas sat by the far wall, arms crossed, studying the rusted ceiling. Orianthe stood silently near the door, fingers occasionally twitching, perhaps recalling that pull. Nadia inspected a ventilation grate, while Charon quietly unpacked rations. A brief moment passed between Lex and Silas. A glance that said more than words, something between "this is too easy" and "stay sharp." Before long, 2 armed escorts arrived. Kane, Greaves, Yorick wants a word. Silas stood. "Stay alert," he told the others. After a glance, he motioned to Trapper. "Let's go." Outside, Wint and Yorick watched the feed. "Recognized," Wint said. "That'll help or hurt." Yorick didn't look away. "Depends what they do next." In the railbones, Mazrak slipped between shadows, recording names, matching faces. He smiled slightly when he saw Silas. And somewhere beneath Gravepoint, something old shifted in its sleep, not yet waking, but listening. Chapter 5. The meeting Yorick's office was dimly lit, more bunker than bureaucracy. A battered desk dominated the room, cluttered with reports, old tech fragments, and an open map weighted down with a rusted knife. Silas and Trapper stepped in, their boots echoing against the reinforced steel floor. Yorick sat behind the desk, Vint to his left, arms crossed, watching with the indifference of someone trained to expect betrayal. "Take a seat," Yorick said, not unkindly. Silas remained standing. "I prefer to see the exits." Trapper gave a thin smile and settled into the chair provided. "Old habits." Yorick leaned back. "You come armed, uninvited, and marked by symbols I don't pretend to understand. I've got a murder unsolved and people on edge. You're not making my day easier." Silas replied evenly, "We're not here to add to your troubles. Rustbrook barely held through the last assault. We came for rest, repairs, and maybe something more. But that depends on how open Gravepoint really is." Wint snorted. "You talk like a diplomat. You smell like a soldier." "I've been both," Silas said. Before Yorick could respond, a sharp knock rattled the door. A young guard stepped in, slightly breathless. "Sir?" "Trouble outside." Yorick stood. "What kind of trouble? Locals?" "They're demanding answers." Yorick let out a slow breath, then nodded. "Let them in." The door swung wider. A knot of angry villagers entered, scrappy men and women with dirt under their nails and wary fire in their eyes. One of them, a lean man in a miner's vest named Kale, pointed directly at Silas. "Who are they to walk in when we've got murder in our streets?" Beside him, Rayma, a tall, sharp-faced woman with soot on her sleeves, crossed her arms. "That kid was found burned and gutted. No word, no justice. We want to know what you're doing about it." Yorick raised a hand. "This is Silas Kane and Trapper Greaves from Rustbrook. They're not suspects, but they've survived more than most of us, and their insights might help." Kale bristled. "We don't need outsiders playing investigator. We need action. Fast." Another voice rose from the back. "Then who's going to investigate, Yorick? You?" Yorick's face darkened. "No, I've got walls to reinforce, trade routes to secure, and a dozen other headaches more pressing than a single—" He stopped himself. But the damage was done. "So it doesn't matter?" Rayma's voice cut sharp. "That kid doesn't matter?" "I didn't say that." "You didn't have to." Yorick stepped forward. "I said it was an accident. The cold took him, or one of the old power cells flared. These things happen." "You weren't there," Kale snapped. "And none of this looks like an accident." The villagers murmured, angrier now. A slow burn rising. Someone knocked over a chair, and Wint shifted subtly toward his sidearm. But Yorick raised his voice just enough to end it. "We're done here. You've had your say." Reluctantly, the group filed out, but the anger stayed, trailing behind them like a storm cloud. Outside the office, the hum of voices grew louder, a low murmur of discontent spreading through the spine. Yorick exhaled and turned back to Silas. "They'll stir that pot until it boils over." He gave a tired smirk, more weary than amused. How about building some goodwill with the locals? You want a favor from this town? Maybe start by doing one. You take a look at that murder thing. Silas arched a brow. You want me to play sheriff now? I want someone to shut them up without making a bigger mess, Yorick replied. They trust outsiders more than they trust me right now. Use that. Trapper scratched his chin. And what do we get in return? Yorick didn't blink. We'll talk. But first, solve the damn murder. He paused, and something faltered in his posture, just for a moment. Truth is, I don't want to dig too deep. Not because I don't care, but because I'm afraid of what's under it. This place, it holds things. Old things. Forgotten for a reason. I don't want to wake what should stay buried. Back in the holding quarters, Orianthe stood near the barred window, her eyes narrowed. A low vibration tugged at her again. This time, more urgent. Her hand twitched. She stepped toward the far wall and paused. Something in the air bent. Not sound, not light, but pressure. She stepped into the corridor, quiet as breath. A boy, no older than 10, watched her from the spine's edge. Pale eyes, thin frame, hands twitching like hers. His face was smudged with dust, but his gaze was clear. One of the orphans from East Bastion, silent, strange, often seen, but rarely heard. He moved toward her with silent purpose. A guard moved to intercept. Kid, get back! Orianthe raised her hand. Let him. The boy stopped a foot away. She knelt, meeting his gaze. You feel it too, don't you? He nodded. His lips barely moved, but his eyes shone with something ancient. Recognition, maybe. A tether forming. Neither of them smiled. Neither spoke again. Just silence. Understanding. The shard, buried beneath Gravepoint, pulsed softly, unseen, but heard. In Yorick's office, the tension settled back into quiet calculation. Silas crossed his arms. All right, we'll look into your mystery. But if this turns out to be more than a body in an alley, if there's something under it, then we'll need more than goodwill. Yorick nodded once. Then I hope it's just a body. Trapper stood, adjusting his belt. We'll dig, Yorick. But if it smells like more than death, don't act surprised when it bites back. Chapter 6. Beneath the surface. The sun crested over the eastern ridge, casting Gravepoint in hard yellow light, as Silas and Trapper followed a wiry local named Garrick toward the site where the boy had been found. Garrick didn't speak much, just gestured with his chin or grunted when necessary. His left hand twitched every few steps, a faint tremor that hinted at nerve damage or an old wound. He wore a canvas vest patched with faded militia insignia and had a worn knife strapped upside down to his shoulder. A man used to surviving close calls. Every now and then, his eyes flicked sideways to study them, like he knew more than he'd ever say. The path wound through the rims, past collapsed huts and shuttered lean-tos. Flies buzzed. The air stank faintly of old ash, sun-baked wires, and rotting ash fabric. Dogs barked in the distance, hoarse, territorial sounds that echoed through the desolation. You the silent type, or just not happy to be guiding us? Trapper asked, his voice sharp with sleep deprivation. Garrick shrugged. Doesn't matter. Not my job to like it. They arrived at the alley. The place had been cordoned off with makeshift tape, and a pair of broken signposts stuck into the ground like mock sentinels. A dark stain remained on the cracked concrete, part blood, part something else. Scorch marks, spider-webbed along the wall, burned into the bricks like fingers clawing upward. Silas crouched, running a finger over the char. Too clean, like it was drained. Locals say the cold got him, Garrick muttered. not looking directly at the scene. "Then why the burn pattern?" Trapper asked. "And where's the rest of the flesh?" There was no answer, only the faint buzz of insects and the whisper of wind between buildings. Silas stood and looked at the scorched wall again, silent for a long beat. "He was just a kid," he muttered. This wasn't weather. This was a message. Back in the center of Gravepoint, Orianthe stood in the corridor outside their quarters. The boy had returned, tugging her sleeve with small, insistent fingers. His eyes never met hers, but his touch was deliberate. Wordlessly, he led her through the spine's winding tunnels. The guards challenged her at the door to the vault stair. Authorized access only. "He's taking me somewhere," she said. "No kids allowed down there either." "We're part of the investigation now," Orianthe said. She met the guard's eyes. "You going to stop me?" The hesitation stretched. One of the guards tightened his grip on his rifle. Another shifted his weight uneasily. "Last time someone went near that thing without clearance, they came back bleeding from the ears. Couldn't speak for days." Orianthe didn't blink. "I'll take the risk." The guards exchanged a look, then reluctantly stepped aside. "Don't touch anything." Below, the vault was dim and cool. Stone walls met metal panels, and ancient conduits pulsed faintly behind reinforced glass. Humming energy danced along the shard's containment. The boy stepped close. Orianthe followed. As she neared, the pulse quickened. Not sound, but a pressure inside her skull, like a memory waking up, or something that had been waiting. Her breath hitched. Behind her, the boy reached out, not to the shard, but to her hand. It was warm, familiar. He didn't speak, but his presence felt like an answer to a question she hadn't asked aloud. She looked at him more closely now, unblinking, solemn, not just a foundling. There was something else. His skin bore faint geometric lines, barely visible like faded circuitry or birthmarks made of design. He didn't look scared, just known, like someone returning to a place he'd always belonged. Above, the rest of the party lazed in their temporary quarters. Lex cleaned his rifle, every motion methodical. Dane picked apart a jammed sidearm and cursed under his breath. The younger soldier, Rel, tossed small pebbles against a tin wall, keeping score in silence. "Feels like calm before the storm," Lex muttered. "Feels like we walked into someone else's problem," Dane replied. Rel looked up, his voice soft. "Or maybe we walked into our own and just haven't realized it yet." Lex smirked, spoken like a man who reads too much philosophy for someone with a plasma rifle. In a gallery above, Yorick stood behind smoked glass, watching. He turned to a man beside him, tall, broad, with a branded collar half hidden under his scarf and eyes that didn't blink often enough. "Keep an eye on them," Yorick said. "Especially the big one. I don't trust easy, and they didn't come this far for a free meal." The man nodded and vanished into the hallway without a word. His name was Goran, once a scaver, now Yorick's shadow. Yorick lingered a moment, rubbing his temple as he stared through the glass. Beneath the bravado, something gnawed at him. The vault hadn't pulsed in years. In the vault, Orianthe reached out. The shard pulsed again, brighter, stronger. She didn't touch it. She didn't need to. Behind her, the boy watched, unmoving. The hum deepened, reaching somewhere far below the base of Gravepoint. The air thickened. Something old had noticed her, and it remembered. Chapter 7. The signal path White City rose like a monolith from the salt glass plains, its perimeter walls gleaming with mirrored panels that reflected the empty sky. Observation towers marked its edges, unmanned, but always watching. There were no slums, no markets, No sprawl, just concentric zones of quiet precision. From above, it looked less like a city and more like a circuit. Cold, wired, perfect. Even the wind, when it crossed the outer shell, seemed to hesitate. At the center of White City, the spire cast its long morning shadow across the sterile terraces and motionless towers. Every window gleamed, yet no eyes watched. Inside, the walls jouts pulsed faintly with embedded conduits, carrying signals like veins through a sleeping organism that had begun to stir. In the observation dome, architect Kalen Thorne stood with hands clasped behind his back. He didn't move, even when the room's central console chimed. Light from 1,000 data feeds glowed across his high-collared coat. The only sound was the low, constant thrum of air circulation and the distant flutter of a landing craft returning from the northern patrol route. Outside the dome, the daily rhythm of White City unfolded with sterile efficiency. Patrol schedules updated themselves every quarter hour. Servitors swept the clean walks with whisper-quiet brushes. Technicians cross-referenced weather telemetry with vault core temperature drift. In the lower barracks, Unit 3 completed its obstacle drill in exactly 4.06 minutes. Not a second late. In the commissary, silent rows of personnel sat eating nutrient packs beneath the soft flicker of recycled daylight. Children in identical learning tunics moved between observation halls and biometric review chambers. There were no laughs, no running footsteps, just the calm hum of a city built on control. White City, to most of its citizens, was a marvel of post-collapse efficiency. But what they couldn't know, was that beneath the general living sectors lay another district. Unmapped, sealed, no access granted to civilians, no mention in official registries. A deep vault below the spire, classified as the Pale Sector. In that sector, nothing stirred without clearance from the upper echelon. No light without purpose, no movement without surveillance. And behind 6 separate bio-locked gates, the true core of White City's operations waited in silence. A junior officer, Lieutenant Kyle Driss, stepped into the dome, his boots soft on the polymer flooring. He saluted with mechanical precision. "Sir, Recon 1 has returned. No contact in the northern basin. Minor signal echo logged near the echelon divide. We've flagged it for relay clearance." Thorne nodded once. "Any fluctuation from the dormant units?" Kyle hesitated. 1. Vault class array. Site R17. We received a pulse, faint. Resonance pattern confirms it's from the fragment recovered post-eclipse. Thorne turned slightly, just enough to reveal a sliver of concern. "Where?" he asked. "Sector Delta G. Civilian name, Gravepoint." From behind the security partition, a mechanical unit emerged. Tall bipedal, plated in matte white and silver, Avel 9. Its voice was calm, genderless, and always half a second too late to feel natural. "Subject, Shard has engaged sympathetic resonance. Level 3 activation. This site is no longer static." Kale stepped back slightly as the mech moved forward. "Sir, the pulse matches O-class parameters. Not enough for full breach, but it is no longer sleeping," Avel 9 said. Kalen faced the display. A topographical projection of Gravepoint hovered in the air. Its vault, comms center, and outlying power lines highlighted. At the center pulsed a slow red light. A new sound entered the chamber, the rhythmic thudding of a descending airframe. Outside, on one of the upper pads, a recon chopper landed. Its legs hissed into locked position, dispersing steam over the sterile deck. From inside, 2 armored scouts stepped down, their suits dust-scoured and antennae twitching. One carried a sealed containment box, marked with an anti-tamper glyph. Their boots echoed off the metal floor as they passed the receiving officer. One of them glanced up toward the spire, a subtle flick of the visor, as if uncertain whether the city was watching them or listening. Inside the dome, Kalen's voice remained level. Begin Silent Protocol A. Classify the site as containment priority. Suspend prior observational neutrality. Kale blinked. We're intervening? No, not yet. Kalen turned fully now. But we will be ready when it crosses the second threshold. Aval 9 tilted its head, its optics shimmering faintly. One of them is awake. The conduit is not alone. Kale frowned. You think she knows what she's carrying? Thorn didn't answer. He tapped the red marker on the display. The pulse spiked as if it felt the attention. Draft a notice to peripheral outposts. Flag all vault sites for reassessment. And Kale? Sir? If Gravepoint falls, we contain. We do not recover. Kyle nodded grimly and left, sparing a glance at the containment box as the scouts passed by. He didn't like the look of it, or the way it seemed to hum, almost imperceptibly. As the door slid shut, Aval 9 remained by the projection. It is awake, the machine said again, and it remembers the shape of its last failure. Kalen didn't respond. His eyes were already on the next data stream, fingers slowly curling as one by one, the pulse markers began to multiply. Let it remember, he said quietly. But this time, Chapter 8, The Signal Path, White City, rose like a monolith from the salt glass plains, its perimeter walls gleaming with mirrored panels that reflected the empty sky. From afar, it looked too symmetrical, too polished, unnaturally precise. The approach was silent, but not welcoming. Drones passed overhead with blinking eyes, and motion sensors tracked every living thing that dared venture close. Supply skiffs skimmed across elevated rails, vanishing through unseen gates. Not a speck of dust touched the road without permission. Observation towers marked the city's edges, unmanned, but always watching. The spire cast its long morning shadow across the sterile terraces and motionless towers. Every window gleamed. Inside, the walls pulsed faintly with embedded conduits, carrying signals like veins through a sleeping organism that had begun to stir. In the observation dome, architect Kalen Thorne stood with hands clasped behind his back. He didn't move, even when the room's central console chimed. Light from 1,000 data feeds glowed across his high-collared coat. The only sound was the low, constant thrum of air circulation and the distant flutter of a landing craft returning from the northern patrol route. Outside the dome, the daily rhythm of White City unfolded with sterile efficiency. Patrol schedules updated themselves every quarter hour. Servitors swept the clean walks with whisper-quiet brushes. Technicians cross-referenced weather telemetry with vault core temperature drift. In the lower barracks, Unit 3 completed its obstacle drill in exactly 4.06 minutes. Not a second late. In the commissary, silent rows of personnel sat eating nutrient packs beneath the soft flicker of recycled daylight. Children in identical learning tunics moved between observation halls and biometric review chambers. There were no laughs, no running footsteps, just the calm hum of a city built on control. White City, to most of its citizens, was a marvel of post-collapse efficiency. But what they didn't know, couldn't know, was that beneath the general living sectors lay another district, unmapped, sealed, no access granted to civilians, no mention in official registries. A deep vault below the spire, classified as the Pale Sector. In that sector, Nothing stirred without clearance from the upper echelon. No light without purpose. No movement without surveillance. And behind 6 separate bio-locked gates, the true core of White City's operations waited in silence. A junior officer, Lieutenant K.O. Driss, stepped into the dome, his boots soft on the polymer flooring. He saluted with mechanical precision. So, Recon 1 has returned. No contact in the northern basin. Minor signal echo logged. Near the echelon divide. We've flagged it for relay clearance. Thorne nodded once. Any fluctuation from the dormant units? Kyle hesitated. 1. Vault-class array. Site R17. We received a pulse. Faint. Resonance pattern confirms it's from the fragment recovered post-eclipse. Thorne turned slightly. Just enough to reveal a sliver of concern. Where? Sector Delta G. Civilian name, Gravepoint. From behind the security partition, a mechanical unit emerged. Tall bipedal. Plated in matte white and silver. Vel 9. Its voice was calm, genderless, and always half a second too late to feel natural. Subject, Shard has engaged sympathetic resonance. Level 3, activation. This site is no longer static. Kale stepped back slightly as the mech moved forward. Sir, the pulse matches O-class parameters. Not enough for full breach, but it is no longer sleeping, Avel 9 said. Kalen faced the display. A topographical projection of Gravepoint hovered in the air. Its vault, comms center, and outlying power lines highlighted. At the center pulsed a slow, red light. A new sound entered the chamber, the rhythmic thudding of a descending airframe. Outside, on one of the upper pads, a recon chopper landed. Its legs hissed into locked position, dispersing steam over the sterile deck. From inside, 2 armored scouts stepped down, their suits dust-scoured and antennae twitching. One carried a sealed containment box marked with an anti-tamper glyph. Their boots echoed off the metal floor as they passed the receiving officer. One of them glanced up toward the spire, a subtle flick of the visor, as if uncertain whether the city was watching them or listening. The containment box was taken deep below, through 4 secure elevators to the Pale Sector. There, high-ranking officers gathered. Kalen Thorne, Avel 9, Kyle Driss, and a senior vault technician, known only as Director Sellian. The box was placed on a secured platform and scanned twice. Then it was opened. Inside under cache of higher-grade pre-fall tech, arc disruptor rifles, a semi-intelligent field processor, advanced biomimetic armor plating, and most importantly, a fragment of mech control lattice, scorched but intact. Thorne's expression barely shifted. These are not just relics, he said. They're keys, pieces of the original command protocol. The relay station is resisting us for a reason. It remembers a different master. Avel 9's optics narrowed. Relay node Alpha remains unreached. Inversion attempts have failed. It is acting defensively, Kale interjected. We're making no progress. In fact, the system's pushing back harder each day. Then we escalate, Thorne said. And we prepare for breach contingency. Just as those words were spoken, alarms chirped quietly in the upper tiers. Outside the eastern perimeter, a band of raiders had broken from the flats. A dozen figures, armored, in scavenged gear, charging recklessly across the Salt Ridge. Thorne observed them on the domed display. Berserker pattern, desperate, possibly decoys. Noted, Kale said. He keyed in authorization. Auto-defense grid prime, weapons free. On the walls, a dozen hidden panels hissed open. Laser turrets emerged, pivoting in quiet synchronicity. Rail-fed machine guns locked on with chirping sensors. When the raiders passed the final threshold, a barrage of light and steel swept them off the plane. Precision, ruthless. Not a single defender was deployed. Thorn didn't flinch. Tell Central Archives to log it as failed infiltration. Disregard DNA recovery. Not worth the time. Avel 9's voice was quiet. The signal is growing. Thorn looked once more at the shard fragment, then at the blinking red dot on Gravepoint. Let it, he said. Chapter 9. Relay Contact. Outside the relay station, dust devils spiraled through the desert heat, scattering grit across cracked ground and rusted hulls. The old world's bones lay half-buried in the sand. Antennae, plating, solar panels bent like broken limbs. The sky was clear, harsh, and watching. Above the dunes, heat shimmered in slow ripple, warping the horizon like a mirage. From a distance, the relay station looked like a fallen god, vast, silent, and half-consumed by sand and time. Within the sterile walls of White City's command sector, the mood had shifted from control to quiet urgency. Architect Kalen Thorn stood once more at the helm of the observation dome, flanked by Lieutenant Kale Driss and Avil 9. The morning routine had passed in silence. Report briefings, ration logs, diagnostic sweeps. But now, all eyes were on the uplink. Across the chamber, the holographic table flickered with new data. A live feed from the relay station team, crackling slightly with static. On screen, a grizzled officer appeared. Commander Halvan, dust-worn and visibly drained. Progress remains negligible, Halvan reported, voice tight. We've established perimeter drones and micro-surveillance within the station, but every attempt to interface with the internal systems has failed. The core remains locked. Whatever architecture runs this place, it doesn't want us here. Thorn steepled his fingers. Obstacles or resistance? Both. Our scans show power fluctuations within the deeper vaults. We've lost 2 drones, disintegrated by automated defenses we didn't activate. Avel 9's mechanical voice cut through. System integrity of Relay Node Alpha remains self-contained. Attempts to override have met anti-inversion protocols. Commander Halvan leaned in slightly. Sir, there's something else. Minor at first, but strange. Thorn's eyes narrowed. Explain. Halvan tapped something off screen. Last night, just before dawn, a pulse spike came through the secondary floor, barely registered. Then, a single defense turret activated, shot down one of our perimeter guards. No warning, no motion detection trigger. Then it powered off again. No one saw it happen. Earlier that day, troops had been patrolling the upper corridors of the relay station. Corridors coated in dust and eerily intact wiring. Every step echoed through hollow metal. One team reported finding scorch marks on the wall, melted in patterns that didn't match any known weapon signature. Another swore. They heard the whine of a power relay humming somewhere beneath the floor. Except no relays were active. Near the command hub, a group of techs had rigged up a scanning array, trying to interpret a static-laced data line that looped an unknown phrase over and over. Directive incomplete. Directive incomplete. Just after shift rotation, a private on guard duty vanished. They found his charred remains, slumped near corridor E7. The turret still smoking above. No one had heard it fire. The squad leader, who discovered him later, claimed his headset had gone dead moments before. Silence hung in the dome. Thorn slowly turned toward the shard fragment, locked in containment, nearby. And you're sure it was the turret? Positive. Surveillance was corrupted, but audio and impact markers match. Kale Driss stiffened. A warning shot, a message. Avel 9's optics flared dimly. System behavior suggests defensive awareness. possibly semi-sentient. Thorne waved a hand. We continue. Increase surveillance. Analyze the kill pattern. Full report within the cycle. Alvin nodded, lips tight, and the screen blinked dark. Below, in the relay station's depths, that same turret nestled into the wall's framework, silent, indistinct from the rest. Power dormant? Again. But within its casing, a single filament glowed faintly. Listening. Back in White City, Thorne turned to Avel 9. The signal from Gravepoint, has it changed? Avel 9 paused. Increased resonance detected. Slight frequency drift. It is moving closer to command language patterns. Then it's waking up, Thorne murmured. His gaze lingered on the shard. And it remembers something we don't. Something it never meant for us to see. Chapter 10. Echoes of truth. Silas and Trapper emerged from the spire's shadow into the cracked streets of Gravepoint. Dust clung to their boots, and the midday heat wavered like a living thing, pressing against Silas's collar and dredging up memories of Rustbrook's final burning dawn. He blinked, refusing to let the past cloud his focus. Split up, he said, voice low but firm. I'll process the scene. You handle the witnesses. Trapper nodded, sliding a fresh notebook into his breast pocket. The scar on his forearm tingled. A familiar warning that tension was climbing. I'll start with the council block, he replied. They've got questions. Silas dropped into a crouch at the alley's center, where the concrete floor glowed faintly with ash. He drew a blood-type swab and gently collected a sample of residue before slipping it into a labeled pouch. Next, he produced a calibrated scanner and swept its emitter over the burn circle. The device flickered erratically, pinpointing faint energy surges unlike anything in Gravepoint's limited arsenal. Consulting a handheld map overlay, Silas watched as an illuminated trace arced away from the burn center, an invisible trajectory that led straight toward Jorek's office. His jaw clenched. Whoever had fired the beam had access to pre-fall tech. He unhooked a tape measure and marked out concentric arcs against the charred wall. The burns were pristine, smooth, uniform edges that spoke of surgical precision rather than random destruction. He pried a shard of fused metal from the concrete, cradling it like evidence in his gloved hand. Behind him, Goran loomed at the alley's entrance, staff rifle resting against his hip. His stillness was unsettling, a living barrier between Silas and the rest of the town. Silas met Goran's unblinking gaze. You're on full watch. Goran's lips tightened. Orders. Silas nodded and activated a pocket spectrometer. The readout danced with exotic alloys and rare earth isotopes. Pre-fall, he muttered. Salvage this deep, and you're in the realm of legends. He jammed the spectrometer back into his belt. Above, a dog barked in a lonely alley. The distant thump of a helicopter's rotor padlock reminded him of the fragile truce that hung over Gravepoint. He stuffed the alloy shard into a pouch and stood. Across the way, Trapper navigated the council block's courtyard, a broken fountain at its center, marble cracked by time and neglect. Villagers pressed against Jorek's heavy wooden door, voices low and urgent. He approached Meros the baker, whose hands still bore flour and sweat. I saw the logs, Meros whispered when Trapper crouched beside him. 2311, calibration code 1147, secure vault. 2347, calibration code 1147, secure vault. 2 nights now. Why keep that secret? Trapper jotted the entries. What's the vault for? Meros's eyes widened. Some say weapons, others say it holds power cores, something to turn the tide if Gravepoint ever falls. Jorek says it's for our safety. A distant creak made them both glance upward. Goran passed the window, footsteps echoing like a warning. Trapper swallowed and moved on to Councilman Hura, who hovered by a collapsed statue. I heard footsteps, Hura admitted, voice quavering. At midnight, beneath my floors, like metal on metal. I thought the town was under attack. Trapper pressed. Did you mention it? Hura shook his head. I feared Jorek's wrath if I spoke out. Trapper's pen paused. Fear of Jorek. Exactly the undercurrent he'd sensed. Back in the alley, Silas slid the spectrometer's lead across melted wire remnants. He traced a faint warmth behind a loose panel, newly installed conduit, hidden from any town survey. He yanked the panel free, revealing a cable linked to the council block's grid. Footsteps on gravel brought Trapper to the alley's mouth, face pale. Data, he said, offering his pad. Alloy shard, secret conduit, calibration logs, midnight patrols. We're locking onto something. Trapper exhaled, wiping sweat from his brow. We need to see that vault. Goran stepped forward, rifle loose in his grip. Council demands answers. Silas fixed Goran with a steady gaze. Answers come on our terms. They advanced toward Jorek's carved door, the wood inset with a silent, painted horse. Gravepoint's emblem. Silas ran a finger over the oil residue in the lion's head carving, feeling the grooves of power etched there. Silas leaned close to Trapper and murmured, Stay ready. Trapper nodded, hand tightening on his steel-tipped pen. The council chamber lay beyond the door, where truths would be tested, and beneath Gravepoint's fractured streets, the shard pulsed, its rhythm entwining with theirs, priming the secrets buried in the dark to bees into the light. Chapter 11. Town under tension. Silas and Trapper moved through Gravepoint's winding lanes, the late afternoon sun washing the crumbled stone in bruised gold. Dust clung to their boots. Every step kicked up grit that settled in their hair. Villagers paused mid-task, washing clothes, tending goats, sweeping porches, to watch the investigators pass in their dust-flecked coats. Councilman Hura hurried to fall in alongside them, voice low. Find anything yet? Silas's hand lifted in a half-salute. Working on it, he replied, scanning faces for tells. Hura's gaze flicked to the dusty residue on Silas's gloves. He swallowed. Be careful. Feelings run high. Ahead, the blacksmith Venza's hammer rang sharp against metal. Sparks bloomed like fiery petals. He slammed the tool down and spat on the ground. Jorek's secrets choke this town, he growled. Trust him and you bleed. Trapper offered a measured smile. Not everyone agrees. A young teacher, Lysa, blocked their path next. Jorek built these walls when no one else would. He's our protector. Silas nodded once, then turned his focus down a narrow alley where a burly farmer, Kieran, stalked forward. The victim, he bled us dry, Kieran snapped, nostrils flaring. Asked Jorek why the price kept climbing. Profit? Trapper murmured. Kieran's spit fell in a dark dot at his feet. Maybe, or something worse. From the corner of Silas's vision, Goran appeared, silent as a shadow. He stepped forward, muscles taut, rifle resting casually. Quiet, Goran barked, rough as gravel. Kieran's eyes flickered. He won't break me easy, Kieran thought, but he'll leave a mark. He lurched back, hitting a wall with a grunt. Silas leaned between them, chest tight. Enough, he roared. This is not your war. His heart pounded in his ears, sweat beading at his brow. Goran's gaze snapped to Silas, fury crackling in his eyes. In one fluid motion, he punched Kieran's jaw. The farmer crumpled to the cobbles, tasting dust and blood. Silas lunged, grabbing Goran's arm. Goran shrugged free, fists clenched. Trapper tried to pry them apart, but the two men crashed together, a blur of fists and flying dirt. A cacophony of shouts erupted. Town guards poured from doorways, boots thundered, and rifles swung up. The air stank of sweat and gun oil. "Break it up," a sergeant hollered, wrenching a rifle free. Its barrel pressed under Silas's chin. "Hands where I can see them." Goran froze. Silas tasted metal on his tongue. Two guards seized Silas's arms and dragged him toward the council hall as Trapper was shoved aside, pain flaring in his ribs. The council doors thundered closed behind Silas. He heard the echo of the iron lock and felt a flicker of betrayal. This was meant to be investigation, not imprisonment. Murmurs and stifled gasps drifted through the hall. Only the shard's distant pulse echoed faintly, as if mocking their plight. Torchlight danced off marble pillars as Silas was thrust before Yorek's dais. Yorek's eyes, cold as steel, bore into him. "You attack my men? As guests in my home?" Yorek's voice rolled like distant thunder. Silas forced calm. His chest heaved. "I intervened. I didn't strike first. I apologize for the chaos." Yorek spat on the floor. "Apology or not, my people bled." Silas bowed his head. "I'm sorry for the blood." Yorek waved an imperious hand. "Lock them away. We speak tomorrow." Guard cuffed Silas and Trapper, their metal links biting cold. A guard spoke softly. "The girl? She and the boy study the shard?" Yorek's lips curved in a cold smile. "Let them worship that relic. If she steps out, lock her away. Resist, and she dies." Goran bowed, darkness flickering in his eyes. Silas and Trapper were led down a torchlit corridor to the guest chambers. The clang of iron boots on stone echoed in his chest, each step a reminder of his sudden captivity. Later that night, Gravepoint's streets lay deserted. Silas pressed his back against the chamber door as distant owl calls and the whispering wind kept him company. His breath shallow with uncertainty. Goran moved like a predator, rifle slung. He paused at a pale moonlit patch where Kieran's body lay. The farmer's broken nose and dried blood glowed in silver light. Goran's gloved hand flexed. The fabric was stained dark. He unclipped a walkie and breathed. "It's done." The walkie crackled. "Understood?" Yorek's finger tapped his temple, stealing his resolve. The device clicked off, and beneath Gravepoint's fractured streets, the shard pulsed, its heart beating in time with the coming storm. Chapter 12. Relay Station Uprising. Back at Relay Station Alpha, the morning sun revealed devastation even before the alarm sounded. Viewport slats were twisted, walls marred by scorching, and pools of half-frozen hydraulic fluid shimmered on the floor. Communications specialist Loara's eyes darted across the security holofeed. Private Rask lay motionless at the outer gate, his rifle warped by intense heat. An ear-splitting klaxon shattered the tense quiet. Red 2! Red 2 system breach! Lieutenant K.O. Driss barked over the comms, his voice tight. Technicians leapt to life, fingers pounding control panels. Monitors flickered with urgent red error codes. Laura slammed her fist on the video uplink console. Commander Halvin's face materialized. "Major Thorne?" A thunderous roar interrupted him. Hidden laser turrets yawned open, unleashing twin streams of emerald light, carving through steel plating, while plasma turrets launched molten spheres that detonated against pillars in fiery blossoms. "Turrets uncommanded!" Loira shrieked. ducking behind a workstation as a plasma globule scorched her cheek. Driss ripped open a terminal's hatch. Wires writhed with erratic energy pulses. "Override neural interface. Bypass link," he roared, yanking cables free. In White City's observation dome, architect Kalen Thorne slammed his palm on the console. "Execute remote shutdown Alpha 9. His words were lost in alarms. Back in the station, static-choked announcements blared. "All units, evacuate." Dormant Watcher and Enforcer Mechs lurched from alcoves, joints hissing. Two hulking Watchers stepped forward, optics flaring crimson, their Gatling laser arms spooling up in staccato roars, hydraulics groaning under weighty footfalls. Explosions thundered through corridors as a ceiling-mounted missile turret screeched and fired a vaned rocket that pulverized an ammo cache in a shockwave. Soldiers unleashed a hailstorm of 5.56 rounds from machine guns and staccato booms from combat shotguns, tossing grenades at mechanical legs. But rogue defenses countered with precise plasma bursts. "Fall back to evac point Omega," Driss barked. Teams sprinted through corridors slick with melted wiring and burning fuel. The ground trembling under mech footfalls. Loira vaulted over a fallen comms rack as lighting flickered and died. Her heart thundered, smoke clawed at her lungs, vision narrowing to the exit sign. Grenade explosions buckled floors, forcing her to launch herself clear. In the landing bay, two armored jeeps roared to life under warning lights. Soldiers manned pintle-mounted machine guns and lobbed grenades at advancing Watchers, whose plasma cannons hissed replies. One Mech's shoulder launcher spat a rocket that tore through a pillar, sending shards like deadly hail. "Move it!" Loira screamed, sliding shells into her shotgun. The jeeps spat gravel as they barreled through the opening, wounded soldiers crammed in the backs. One clinging to consciousness with a tourniquet bound around his side, another staring blankly into chaos. Laser beams, scorched door frames, veins of light racing across metal. On the console feed, Halvin's ragged voice cut in. "We're retreating. No further contact. Godspeed." The uplink fizzled into static. Silence fell over White City's command center. Thorne's reflection glimmered on the dark screen, eyes hollow with dread. Relay Station Alpha had come alive. Above it all, the shard pulsed, its silent resonance heralding a new, brutal age.
Chapter 13 City of Glass and Panic. The glass tower of White City's central tier stood in silence. From its highest spire, architect Kalen Thorne watched the horizon, arms crossed behind his back, face carved from glass himself. Below him, a dozen concentric sectors buzzed with precision and panic. The relay station had fired back. Operatives were dead. Systems scrambled. And the feed had gone dark. AVEL-9 glided to his side, its chrome surface fractured slightly where static had ruptured during the retreat. The air around it smelled faintly of ozone and scorched filament. Relay integrity is fully self-reinforced. It operates on logic trees beyond inherited protocol. Thorne didn't look away from the skyline. "Meaning? We never controlled it." He nodded once. "Then it's a node. Not a relic. Not dormant. A node. Connected to others. Possibly still awake." Across the control floor, Lieutenant Cale Dries stood with one hand in a sling, the other clenched behind his back. "We underestimated it. I take responsibility." Thorne turned slowly. "No, Lieutenant. We misclassified it. We thought it was dead tech. It is not. It is territorial." Dries looked down. AVEL-9's head rotated 45 degrees. "Incoming intercepts from outer patrol bands. Sand level movement. Not organized. Not native. Thorne walked to the command table. A projection bloomed to life, the relay station, pulsing faintly, surrounded by interference. Bring the city to Delta Alert. Arm all Exo-Sentinel units. Reinforce Sector 5. It touches the eastern limit. Dries hesitated. Sir, that breaches protocol. The citizenry will be shielded by silence until we're ready to speak. Outside, the streets of White City began to change. The soft white glow of ambient lighting darkened to deep amber. Border checkpoints clicked into place. Patrols doubled. Drones buzzed higher. The public screens went static for 20 seconds. In the pale sector beneath the city, cold containment doors hissed open. Rows of inactive armor frames began to stir. Steam bled from the seams as long idle servos locked into readiness. Thorne stood above it all. His voice low. If the relay has chosen a side, we must prepare for visitors. And not all of them will knock. AVEL-9 responded. Probability of Wasteland incursion up 67%. Observer protocol, if enacted, would trigger full Spectre deployment. Denied, Thorne said. Not yet. Not until we know who's listening. The tower lights dimmed. And the city, so long the hunter, began to brace like prey. Orianthe felt it in her ribs, not as pain, but as a change in pressure, like the sky had just taken a deeper breath. She sat cross-legged near the wall of the quarters they'd been given, the boy beside her, half awake, his thin fingers still resting on the toy. The carved object was scorched but whole, and its presence was strangely calming. Neither of them knew what had happened at the relay station. But both had felt something. A shift. A signal. A window opening somewhere in the dust. The boy looked up at her. The faint geometric lines beneath his skin were glowing again, soft and irregular. His voice was barely audible. It's louder now, Orianthe nodded. I know. She stood and crossed to the door, glancing out the slatted window. The sky over Gravepoint was flat and yellow with haze. Somewhere in the railbones, a wind stirred the broken tin panels. She turned back to the boy. Let's go outside. Just for a moment. They stepped out quietly. The moment they did, shouts rang out. Guards on the far side of the square raised their rifles. The two of them froze. Hands up, one shouted. Now, Orianthe's instincts kicked in. She raised her arms slowly, shielding the boy with her body. Wait, she called. We haven't done anything. What's going on? No answer. Just footfalls. Dust. Guns. And then she saw it. A crowd had gathered near the edge of the square. Villagers formed a loose ring around something on the ground. As the guards pulled her and the boy forward, she caught a glimpse of it, a body, half covered with a sheet. A woman's hand poked out from underneath, scorched and still twitching. A fresh murder. And somehow, they were suspects. She didn't fight as they were dragged through the gates into the bunkhouse block. Inside, the rest of the crew sat behind a field lock, Silas, Lex, Dane, Rel, even Trapper, leaning heavily against a crate. They looked up in unison as she and the boy were shoved inside. Lex stood. Ori, Silas moved to the edge of the field. What the hell is going on? Orianthe didn't answer immediately. She just held the boy close, staring past her team to the rust-stained wall behind them. Something's changed, she whispered. And they're already afraid of it. Silas exhaled and motioned her closer. After you left, the boy from before. Right. Found dead in the railbones. Neck snapped. No witnesses. That was the first. Wince trying to cover it. But Jurex pushing for blood. Orianthe blinked. Then there's more. She told them what she saw, the body in the square, the villagers gathered, the twitch of a scorched hand beneath a blanket. This one's fresh. Female. Burn marks. They looked at me like I did it. Trapper groaned from his corner. That makes 2 bodies in 24 hours. We're being set up. Or someone's clearing a path. Rel checked her pulse rifle, even though it had been decharged. Either way, they want us contained. Dane glanced toward the locked door. And the next move's not ours. A silence settled over them, thick, electric. Then, from the rear of the quarters, opposite the guard's line of sight, came a single knock. 3 beats. A pause. Then 2 more. Lex moved first, crossing quietly to the back wall. That's not a pattern the militia uses. Silas stood. And there are no guards on that side. They all turned. The boy looked up, his voice steady for the first time. Someone's coming. The back panel of the quarters creaked open. A figure stepped inside, a villager clad in white scava robes, dust-streaked and deliberate. He grinned as he closed the door behind him. Well, he said, surveying the group. That took you long enough to get locked up. Silas narrowed his eyes. You have a name? The man tilted his head, smile unwavering. For now, call me Weaver. I help people who ask the wrong questions. Silas crossed his arms. Then help us with this one. What do you know about the murders? Weaver's grin faded slightly. I know more than most, but I'd rather hear what you know first. Silas glanced at the others, then stepped forward. Rye was getting greedy. Cutting Jarek out of side deals. Word is he was holding back stock, playing both sides. He died clean, neck broken, fast. He paused, jaw tightening. The other one, that wasn't clean. Burn marks. I saw the wound pattern once before. Pre-fall plasma rifle. Military grade. High tech. Too clean for any local scava. Weaver nodded, thoughtful. Which means someone wants this to look like chaos, but it's anything but. Silas added quietly, the town's split. Wint wants order. Jarek wants control. Pro-Jarek signs are going up. Anti-Jarek ones vanish overnight. Someone's laying the groundwork for a purge. Weaver's smile returned, colder this time. Then it's a good thing I came when I did. Silas watched him carefully. I'm getting a feeling about this, but it doesn't make sense. Weaver arched an eyebrow. Go on. Silas hesitated. That's not some pipe bomb or smuggler torch. That's high-end. High-tech. Weaver didn't interrupt. He just listened. Silas looked around the room, almost like he was asking their silence for permission. I know it sounds impossible. But whoever did this has access to something Gravepoint shouldn't have. And if I'm right, they're not done. Rel broke the silence. You think this was a demonstration? Lex nodded slowly. Or a message? Not for the town. For us. Trapper scoffed, but it lacked conviction. And whoever sent it knows we'll understand it. Weaver folded his arms, voice lower now. You're starting to catch on. This isn't just about politics. It's about leverage. And someone wants to see what you'll do when you're cornered. You don't know how, but you know why. Silas held his gaze. Getting closer, Weaver leaned in slightly, eyes narrowing. Then riddle me this. Why was the last one killed right after telling you Jarek's got his hands in everything? The room went still. Trapper slowly straightened. Lex's jaw tensed. Silas's voice was quiet. Because she got specific. Weaver nodded once. And specific gets you silenced. He let the silence breathe, then straightened. All right, I'll show you something. Or rather, his eyes scanned the group, I'll show one of you. A pause. Then, casually, who's the sneaky one among you? All eyes turned to Trapper. The older man raised a brow, groaning softly as he stood. Figures, Weaver grinned. Follow me. Without waiting, he turned and disappeared through the same hidden panel he entered from. Trapper glanced once at Silas, who gave a small nod, then followed. The alley behind the bunkhouse was pitch black. They moved quickly, silently, hugging the shadows. Weaver led with uncanny ease, ducking beneath hanging wire, timing their steps between the sweep of wall-mounted cams, weaving through silent courtyards and collapsed scaffolds. They passed 2 guards at a checkpoint without being seen. Weaver didn't speak, only held up 2 fingers, then pointed upward. Trapper understood. A crate, a low rooftop, then a drop behind a rusted ventilation tower. The sound of the town faded. The silence felt almost curated. Weaver whispered, "You're about to see how deep it goes." They continued deeper into Gravepoint's understructure, abandoned alleys, forgotten culverts, and cracked industrial corridors warped by time and heat. The path narrowed, visibility reduced to a flickering slit of blue light. Weaver occasionally checked on a cracked handheld. Trapper followed without hesitation, moving with a predator's silence. At one point, he reached out and steadied Weaver before she stepped onto a pressure plate wired with old sensors. She looked back, eyes narrowing with new respect. The last stretch led them into a collapsed transport tunnel. A rust-stained pipe clung to one wall like a spinal cord. At its end, a reinforced utility door with no handle, only a faded panel flickering in the dark. Weaver stepped aside. "Can you get us in?" Trapper knelt. His hands moved with practiced economy, pulling a thin kit from beneath his coat. He worked the mechanism slowly, listening for clicks. 1. 2. A pause. Then, the lock disengaged with a soft hiss. He stood. "After you." Weaver pushed the door open. Beyond it lay a vault, wide, cold, dimly lit by strips of failing emergency lights. The room was larger than Trapper expected, half swallowed by shadows and half glinting with the dull gleam of sealed crates, metallic racks, and black cases stacked to the ceiling. The air smelled faintly of ozone and old coolant. Trapper stepped inside, slowly. One row held collapsed drone shells with White City stenciling partially scratched out. Another rack bore experimental weapons, coil rifles, magnetized arc blasters, and folded components for something far worse. He saw 3 plasma casings identical to the one used in the murder. His voice was low. "This is an armory." Weaver walked ahead, touching one crate lightly. "No. This is a library of stolen futures. Gravepoint's silent stockpile, pre-fall, post-fall, scavenged, smuggled, and denied. Jarek funds half of it. The other half funds him." Trapper carried something massive slung across his shoulder, a sleek, angular plasma rifle that hummed faintly in the dark. "Seek no more," he said. "You wanted to know who had the firepower." He let the weapon slide from his back and leaned it gently against the wall. Weaver followed and unslung a battered military-grade backpack. "Since they took our gear when they locked us up." She unzipped the pack. Trapper did the same with a second. Inside, energy rifles, charged pistols, a few compact kinetic blasters, and a pair of combat knives still coated in maintenance gel. The weapons looked ancient and advanced all at once, pre-fall tech, scavenged, cleaned, ready. Rel let out a low whistle. Dane's eyebrows climbed. "Where the hell did you?" Lex started, then stopped. Silas stepped forward, slow. "Does it matter?" He met Trapper's gaze. "You brought us a way out." Everyone began reaching into the packs, selecting weapons instinctively. Rel grabbed a pulse carbine and holstered a sidearm with a practiced flick. Dane picked out a short-barrel rifle and a collapsible baton. Lex took a modular blaster and tucked an energy knife into her boot. Trapper slung a coil-charged shotgun across his back. Silas didn't stop them, but he raised a hand as they finished. "One rule: everyone takes an energy sidearm." He held one up, a dull silver pistol with a selector switch on the side. "Set it to stun. We don't want to kill unless we have to. This isn't a war yet." The others nodded. Rel thumbed her pistol's switch. Lex muttered, "Copy that," and checked the setting. They were armed again. But the air felt heavier, not lighter. Like they'd crossed a line none of them could walk back from. Outside, the first hints of dawn began to pale the sky with a dull violet wash. It gave the moment a fragile edge, like the quiet before an explosion. Orianthe holstered her blaster, then stepped forward. "We have to get back to the relay station. The shard, it's linked to whatever happened." "We felt the pulse, Silas. It wasn't random. It was a door." Silas shook his head. "First, we have to get out of here, alive." He glanced toward the locked front, then to the back panel where Weaver had entered. "No use chasing the truth if we're gunned down before we reach it." Weaver stepped toward the narrow slit of a window, peering into the dustlit street beyond. "I can help with that. I've got people. Quiet ones. I can raise a distraction, pull some guards, stir some panic. Make it look like you're already gone." Dane shifted his stance. "What about Wint?" Weaver didn't hesitate. "He's on patrol, north perimeter. Should be back inside the hour. If we're going to move, it has to be before then." Orianthe holstered her blaster, then stepped forward. "We have to get back to the relay station. The shard, it's linked to whatever happened. We need to understand it before they do." They didn't speak until the second horizon came into view, the line of blackened rail towers that marked the end of Gravepoint's reach. There, in the shallow cover of a collapsed drainage pipe, the group caught their breath. Silas scanned the group, everyone present. No injuries. Adrenaline's still high. Weaver crouched beside a crumbling concrete ledge. "We've got maybe 30 minutes before they triangulate your path. Wint will sweep this sector first." Orianthe looked back toward the rising smoke. "He'll know it was us." "Of course he will," Weaver said. "The question is what he does with that." Lex reloaded her sidearm. "So where now? We can't just run blind." Silas nodded. "We don't. We run intentional. We loop south, past the broken basin. There's a dry access tunnel that leads halfway to the ridge. We disappear until we're ready." Dane looked to Orianthe. "And the relay station?" She didn't hesitate. "We go back. The shard reacted to something. That's not a coincidence. Whatever's awakening out there, it's connected to us now." The boy finally spoke. "The door's still open." They all turned toward him. His eyes glowed faintly beneath the skin. Silas stood. "Then let's not waste it." They moved. Southward. Away from Gravepoint. Toward the truth. But they didn't get far. The crack of a boot on gravel stopped them cold. From the slope above the drainage pipe, a figure emerged, broad-shouldered, armor dusty from the patrol. "Wint." He raised his rifle before speaking. "Don't." The team spread out instinctively. Lex raised her blaster halfway. Rel and Dane flanked. Orianthe stepped in front of the boy. "Didn't take long to find you," Wint said. "Figured you'd run. Figured you'd chase," Silas replied. Wint's grip on his rifle tightened. "You left a corpse and a hole in our fence. And you locked us up for someone else's crime," Lex shot back. No one moved for several long seconds. Tension snapped like static in the air. Then Silas stepped forward. "Wint," he said firmly. "Stop." The two men locked eyes. Years of duty passed in a glance. "We're not your enemy," Silas said. "You know that. You know that." Wint hesitated. A flicker crossed his face, anger, confusion, something old and brittle beginning to crack. Behind him, more militia shapes appeared on the ridge, uncertain, waiting. Silas's voice stayed low. "This place is turning. You can feel it. Jurek's using fear like a weapon. We're not the danger. But we will defend ourselves. Wint looked at the boy. At the glowing lines. At the shard tucked into Orianthe's pack. His voice was low. Jarek's gone out of line. This wasn't the plan. He lowered his rifle. Not all the way. But enough. Go, he said gruffly. Before I change my mind, they went. And this time, no one followed. 3 hours later, just before noon, they returned. Not to surrender, but to finish what Jarek started and never meant to end. Wint stood by the south barricade when he saw them again. He didn't raise his weapon. Silas approached first, hands visible. We're not here to fight. We're here to clean up what's left. Wint nodded slowly. About time someone did. Together, they moved through the streets of Gravepoint, Silas and Wint side by side. The militia split as they passed, not out of fear, but recognition. The old balance had broken. They disarmed Jarek's remaining loyalists, exposed the vault's secrets, and cleared the council hall. Weaver frowned as he examined the emptied lockbox beneath the council floor. Jarek took the last clean map and enough credits to run, he muttered. And Goran knew the tunnels better than most. There was no speech. No ceremony. Just action. Some villagers watched from the doors. Others stepped forward, quiet, weary, but ready. By the time the sun dipped low, it wasn't just militia walking with Silas and Wint. It was the people. By nightfall, Gravepoint had new order. And an old alliance, rebuilt in silence, sealed with trust. Silas and Wint stood atop the southern watchtower as dusk fell. Still think I should have shot you, Wint muttered. Silas smirked. Then I'd be a ghost haunting your regrets, Wint grunted. Better a regret than Jarek's shadow. They shook hands. The kind that meant something. By the next morning, Silas had assembled a small team. 5 volunteers from the militia stood ready, tough, quiet men and women who had seen what Jarek's silence cost. They didn't ask questions. They simply nodded when Silas outlined the mission: support Orianthe in reaching the relay station. 2 engineers waited near the gate, Dre and Lysa, both reluctant. We stabilize systems, Dre said. We don't run toward whatever shook the sky last night. We're not asking you to fight, Orianthe told them. We need eyes that understand what the relay is, what it's becoming. Lysa folded her arms. And what if it kills us? Orianthe held up the shard. It shimmered faintly in the morning light, casting thin geometric shadows across her face. Then it was already coming, she said. This way, you see it coming, too. Dre exhaled, long and slow. Damn it. That silenced them. A minute later, they joined the formation. The team was ready. The relay was waiting. The desert was quieter than usual. No wind. No insects. No echo from their footsteps as they moved along the fractured plateau leading to the relay station. As if the land was holding its breath. The shard pulsed once in Orianthe's pack. She stopped. So did the others. The engineers, Dre and Lysa, exchanged a glance. The boy turned his head, staring off toward the ridgeline. He didn't blink. Something's shifted, Orianthe said. It's listening again. They crested the final rise. The relay station stood like a collapsed cathedral, vast, monolithic, its outer shell cracked from age or violence. Towering pylons bent inward, forming a fractured halo around the central dome. Faint lines of energy spider webbed across its surface, flickering with a pulse that matched the shard's rhythm. Wasn't like that before, Lex murmured. No, said Silas. It's waking up. They approached carefully, weapons lowered but ready. Sand had half buried the entrance, but the old metal had begun to shift, groaning under its own weight. As they neared, the door opened on its own, smooth, silent, as if recognizing them. Inside, cool, sterile air. Dustless. Lights flickered in distant corridors. Symbols pulsed on the walls, shapes none of them could read, but the boy seemed to track them like a map. A low resonance filled the space, like a mechanical heartbeat buried deep within the structure. "This place is alive," Dre muttered. "It's always been," the boy said, almost a whisper. At the far end of the corridor, a single room pulsed brighter. The team advanced. They had returned. And the relay was ready. The chamber pulsed with a low, rhythmic hum, more felt than heard. The walls curved gently, like the inside of a great lens, and lines of light arced between crystalline nodes embedded in the structure. No dust. No signs of age. It had been asleep, not decaying. Orianthe stepped forward. The shard flared in her pack. A panel on the far wall shimmered to life, symbols cascading across its surface. They reformed into a spiral, then expanded outward in fractal symmetry, until a single glyph held. Not text. A signal. The boy walked toward it, as if in trance. When his palm touched the wall, the entire room responded. A pulse spread outward in concentric rings. The hum deepened, and the light dimmed momentarily, as if something immense had stirred below. "What's he doing?" Dre asked, backing away. "He's opening something," Silas said quietly. Another panel slid open. Inside, a suspended console, still active. A small drone detached from the ceiling and hovered above them, scanning each face before retreating. Then a voice crackled to life through unseen speakers, garbled, ancient, but intelligible. "Interface confirmed, primary key detected, relay status, reactivation underway." They stood frozen as the walls shifted again, revealing a map, massive and layered, of a network spanning far beyond what they had imagined. Star-shaped nodes pulsed red, others green, with one, near their location, flashing amber. The relay was not alone. And neither were they. Dre stepped cautiously toward the console, eyes scanning the wiring, the dormant nodes, the interface ports glowing faintly beneath the surface. "This is centuries ahead of anything we've seen," he murmured. "Some of these relays, they're quantum locked. And this port, it's not for human hands." Lysa reached toward a recessed panel. As her fingers brushed it, a whir sounded from above. A turret descended from the ceiling, mechanical limbs unfolding with a low click. A red sensor flared to life, locking on them. Everyone froze. The turret tracked them, its targeting laser sweeping across chests, throats, faces. A single breath might have triggered it. Then the light blinked. Red, yellow, green. The turret folded itself back into the ceiling, disappearing as silently as it had emerged. Recognition. The relay had seen him, and allowed him to remain. Orianthe stepped closer to the suspended console. A flicker of movement drew her eye. Beneath the transparent panel, a thin sheet unfolded, displaying what looked like a blueprint. Rotating schematics of the relay, overlaid with shifting energy paths and nodes she couldn't decipher. She reached in and carefully withdrew the blueprint. The shard pulsed violently. She winced, then steadied herself. Her hand found the boy's instinctively. As their fingers touched, the pulse steadied, then deepened. Lights throughout the complex brightened 1 degree, shifting from cold white to a soft amber. Then came a whisper, not spoken, but transmitted through the floor, the walls, the light itself. A tone of welcome and warning. Something had acknowledged them. Something old. And watching. The deeper they went, the more alien it became. The relay no longer resembled a ruin. It breathed, responded. Walls shifted open with a sound like exhalation, revealing corridors lined with glimmering cables and crystalline panels. With every step, the shard in Orianthe's possession pulsed brighter, and the complex responded in kind. Light panels flared awake as they passed. Screens once dormant flickered with jagged telemetry and glyphs no one could translate. Some showed bursts of data, orbital patterns, genetic threads, fractured maps of what looked like other stations. Others just repeated a single phrase in looping crimson text. Prime signal acknowledged. Lysa paused before one display, eyebrows knitting. This one's, it's reading our biosigns. She means it's tracking us, Dre clarified, tapping a display. Not just that, scanning us, matching us to something. Profiles, the boy said. Everyone turned. He was staring at another screen. It showed their faces, flickering, tagged, each with strange code beneath. Silas's image was labeled with a jagged red mark. Orianthi's glowed blue. The boy's? Not labeled at all. Just static. Why aren't you tagged? Lex asked. The boy didn't answer. A low vibration ran through the floor. Not an earthquake. Not mechanical. Rhythmic, deliberate. The relay wasn't just watching. It was calling something. Orianthi tightened her grip on the blueprint she'd taken. We need to go deeper. Another door opened ahead, without touch, without command. And from within, a voice none of them had heard before spoke clearly through the air, key carrier and catalyst. Proceed. They stepped forward. The complex obeyed. The corridor narrowed. Ceiling arched lower. The walls no longer metal, but something like obsidian, veined with shifting light. The relay was not merely advanced. It was evolving. Symbols flowed across the surfaces as they passed. Not static carvings. Alive, reactive. The shard pulsed again, and the symbols pulsed in return, mirroring its rhythm. Can a machine dream? Dre whispered. Orianthi didn't answer. Her eyes stayed fixed on the blueprint, which now pulsed in her hands. One corner had begun to glow, a chamber marked deep in the station's heart. They reached a lift. No buttons. No controls. The door opened as they neared. It descended, fast, smooth, soundless. Then stopped. Before them lay a chamber unlike the rest. A cathedral of shadow and light, its walls curved and sweeping like the inside of a shell. In the center, a suspended platform hovered, above nothing. Beneath it, a void fell away, filled with threads of glowing filaments stretching into infinity. The boy stepped forward first. The platform lowered to meet him. And far below, something stirred. Not violently, but with weight. A whisper filled the chamber, not words, but presence. The relay had brought him to its core. From the edge of the platform, narrow bridges unfurled, extending to peripheral chambers that hadn't existed moments before. Orianthi, the boy, and Dre crossed into one. It was circular, dim, and quiet. Crystal filaments floated mid-air, each one containing a suspended shape, faces, battles, long-forgotten cities. The echo chamber. These are memories, Orianthi murmured. As they moved between the floating memory filaments, one pulsed brighter than the rest, then activated. A projection filled the chamber, not a moment, but a history. A vast planetary network. Relay stations, hundreds of them, spread across the globe like a neural web. Each one connected to others, pulsing data, energy, and intent. The relays were constructed in the final phase of the pre-fall civilization, a voice narrated, neutral and mechanical. They formed the backbone of the Planetary Oversoul Initiative, a distributed system designed to preserve knowledge, stabilize ecology, and link settlements across vast distances. The display shifted, showing conflict. Sabotage. Cities lost. Flickering nodes. As the collapse neared, certain nodes sought autonomy, others were corrupted. The system fragmented. Oversoul shut down. Emergency protocols sealed the relay cores. Access denied until proper catalyst, key alignment re-established. The vision dissolved, leaving only the pulse of the shard, and the knowledge that they now stood inside one of the last active relays on the planet. Stored, preserved, they approached a node. It flickered to life, displaying the scene, a catalyst and key carrier, different people, standing where they stood now. The memory shimmered, distorted, then broke. Another orb lit up. A voice this time, fragmented. Connection failed, synthetic integration, threat undefined, fallback protocol initiated, they backed away. More orbs lit up in response, as if aware of their presence. Dozens. Then hundreds. Then a door opened in the floor. A shape rose from below, silver-skinned, sexless, vaguely human, and glowing softly with the relay's pulse. Its face was blank. Then it opened its eyes. Key carrier, it said, voice layered with metallic harmony. Catalyst, Orianthe raised the shard. The being inclined its head. I am the interface. You have breached the core. You have awakened what was sealed. What was sealed? Silas asked. The interface turned to him. Purpose, power, and consequence. It looked to the boy, and for the first time, hesitated. No record, no framework, no match. Can you explain what he is? Orianthe asked. I can only confirm what he is not. The relay around them shifted again. Another pulse. Another door unlocking. Something deeper waited. The interface raised a hand. You must decide, proceed, and risk alignment, or return, and remain blind. No one moved. The boy stepped forward. I remember, he said softly. But it's not mine. They followed the interface through another corridor, this one narrower and humming with a rising frequency that made the walls vibrate. At its end, a monolithic pillar, seamless and silver, with a shallow depression at its base, shaped exactly like the shard. Orianthe froze. This is it, the keyhole. No one spoke. Lex shifted uneasily. Dre stepped forward, scanned the interfaces. If this activates the relay, we might not be able to turn it off. Or it activates everything connected to it, Silas added. Stations, weapons, mechs. The interface stood silent. We don't know what we're waking up, Lysa whispered. For a moment, no one moved. Then the boy stepped forward, took the shard from Orianthe's hand, and pressed it into the slot. A light burst outward, rippling through the pillar, then arcing into the walls. The relay woke. Throughout the station, systems surged to life. Data streams cascaded. Lights turned blinding white. The distant rumble of power surged upward from the deep. In vaults unseen, massive machines stirred. Mechs, hundreds of them. Red eyes blinked open. The relay was fully online. The relay's pulse didn't just wake the machines, it woke the world. High above the desert where the station was buried, satellites blinked to life. Not all were human. A few hadn't sent data in decades. But now they turned. Tracked. Registered. Watched. In the pale sector of White City, AVEL-9's main lens widened a fraction. Origin signature matched. Relay system prime. Reactivated. Kalen Thorne stood in silence as monitors filled with scrolling data. One image expanded. A faint pulse radiating in concentric circles from Gravepoint's edge. Containment failed, Kale Dries muttered. Worse, Thorne said, they've breached the core. Down in the relay station, Silas and Orianthe stood motionless as the systems around them surged with power. The mechs, 3 meters tall and armored in blackened alloy, remained still, but online. Red optics flared and settled. Their limbs flexed experimentally, like creatures waking from long hibernation. No signal from them, Dre said, eyes wide. But they're running. Waiting, Lysa corrected, for orders. The interface returned, stepping silently from the shadows. Autonomous units remain dormant until proper alignment protocol completes. They require command chains. Whose command? Silas asked. The interface tilted its head. Yours. If the relay accepts. Orianthe held the boy's hand tightly. And if it doesn't? A sound like distant thunder echoed through the complex. Dre ran to a console. Incoming. Who? Lex asked. Dre looked up. White City. They're locking us in. Sirens began to flare. One screen showed an inbound craft. Another showed exterior access points closing. A third showed one of the newly activated mechs shutting down violently, crumpling into smoke and sparks. Lysa gasped. They're sending a kill signal. External override, Orianthe asked. No, Dre whispered. This was buried, old code, designed to burn the whole system if it ever came back. The interface raised its hand and the screen blinked off. Sabotage code active, relay under siege. The boy stepped forward. His eyes glowed faintly now. He placed a hand against the pillar again. The glow spread. One by one, the remaining mechs shuddered, then steadied. Lights returned. The sabotage halted. The interface stared at him. Manual override. Impossible. Silas looked around. Not impossible, just unexpected. The relay had chosen its defender. And somewhere, White City knew it had failed to stop what was coming. Lysa turned. Something's opening. A section of wall that had previously read as seamless now folded outward, revealing a narrow passage lit with pale blue strips. At the end, a sealed room marked with the glyph for memory. They entered carefully. Inside were rows of stasis pods, most dark, but a few blinking slowly. The remains inside wore uniforms, aged, torn, but still bearing a crest none of them recognized. One pod had been shattered from within. Lex crouched beside a control panel, brushing away layers of ash. Who were these people? Dre found an intact console and activated playback. A flickering image appeared. A woman's face, tired, bloodied. This is Catalia Vaughn. Final attempt at integration. We couldn't find a viable key. The relay rejected the pairs. Internal sabotage suspected. If anyone finds this, static overtook the feed. Do not proceed without true alignment. The system learns. And it remembers. Orianthe looked to the interface. How many before us? The interface responded slowly. 15 attempts, 0 full integrations. This instance is anomalous. As they turned to leave, the boy stumbled. Orianthe caught him. His face had gone slack, eyes unfocused. Then he inhaled sharply, and the room changed. Light surged from the shards still at his belt. The echoed chamber rippled again, but instead of a projection, they all saw it. A field, a mountain, a burning sky. Silas backed away. We're seeing it. No, the interface said. You are sharing it, his memory, or a future echo. The relay is unsure. The boy whispered, I've been here. I will be here. The vision ended. He collapsed. Later, as they gathered in the main core chamber again, the interface stood before them. Its voice was different now. Less mechanical. More human. Learning from you. Why? Silas asked. To understand what comes next. Purpose requires context. You are context. Orianthe touched the shard. And the boy? The interface tilted its head. Not catalyst, not key, not known. A pause. But the relay listens to him. Chapter 20 Reverberations. The relay did more than wake the machines. It woke the world. In the pale sector of White City, alarms whispered before they screamed. The central display chamber filled with crimson glyphs. Kalen Thorne stood in silence, eyes fixed on the pulse map expanding from Gravepoint. Behind him, Lieutenant Cale Dries clutched the static-filled headset. No contact with East Vault. Defense rings are dark. Thorne didn't blink. Relay system prime is active. I want everything below Sector 10 on lockdown. AVEL-9's voice floated overhead. Containment breach confirmed. Unknown override protocol detected. Far to the north, buried under centuries of glacial ash, an old Dominion listening post flickered to life. Its systems hadn't blinked in decades. But now, a red beacon lit across its dormant map. Beneath the ice, a single mech twitched. Its chest plate bore the relay insignia. It powered on. In the back room of a makeshift bar in the core spine of Gravepoint, Masrick leaned over a cracked monitor. His signal boards were dead except one, a direct line relay broadcast blinking in intervals only he understood. They really found it, he whispered. And it's talking back. He poured himself a drink with a hand that trembled, then slid a hidden drawer open beneath the desk. Inside, an old earpiece and a marked envelope. He hesitated, then took both. Beneath the scorched remains of an ocean platform, once part of the pre-fall Leviathan Ark, a sealed door cracked open for the first time in over a century. Inside, a circular chamber shivered. Dozens of nodes, each housing a dormant construct, blinked once. Then again. Then together. The relay's pulse had reached them. In a desert halfway across the continent, the signal rats crouched around a portable receiver salvaged from a derailed drone. Tika, the youngest, twisted the copper dial just as the tone shifted. "That's not static," she murmured. "It's layered. Like a song." Bran frowned. "What sings from the relay?" "Not what," she said. "Who?" She glanced at the boy-shaped silhouette drawn in her notebook, outlined in soft charcoal weeks before they'd ever heard the name Silas Kane. Back in White City, Thorne descended into the sealed vaults of the Pale Sector. A room sealed with triple code authentication hissed open. Inside, 3 figures stood, faces hidden beneath mirrored veils. One spoke. "Protocol Helix is now authorized." Thorne nodded. "Then we act." And far below it all, at the core of the relay, the boy stirred. The shard blinked. And something vast, ancient, and unfinished began to listen back. The relay center pulsed with silent readiness. Lights tracked motion. Systems adapted. It was no longer just a vault of memory, it was becoming a command hub. Silas stood before the massive holo spire at the core of the chamber. On its surface flickered outlines, mechs, troop formations, terrain maps. He turned slowly, addressing those gathered, Orianthe, Lex, Dre, Lysa, the 5 volunteers from Gravepoint, and the 2 engineers who still looked like they regretted everything. "We don't know what's coming," Silas said. "But this place, this relay, it's giving us the means to stand up to it." The interface hovered nearby. Its form had refined, less fragmented light, more shape. Command protocol aligning. Units await tactical imprint. Lex, quiet until now, spoke up. "What if it tries to control us?" The interface's glow flickered. "Biological override prohibited. Autonomy preserved." Dre muttered, "That's not comforting." Orianthe approached the formation screen. "How many mechs are online?" 21 fully functional. "Another 9 in restoration," said Dre. "And more waking up by the hour." "Command them?" asked one of the militia volunteers, eyes wide. Silas nodded. "We're not going to war yet, but we're going to be ready when it comes." He stepped toward the interface. "Begin imprint." Lines of light surged through the floor. In chambers deeper below, armored limbs stirred. Optics blinked. One by one, the mechs aligned. Not with fear. Not with hesitation. With purpose. "Prep all units," Silas ordered. "Techs, scan for anything salvageable. Engineers, get whatever's still running optimized. Everyone else, gear up. Take what you need. Weapons, armor, tools, if it can help us survive, we carry it." Lysa activated a hidden terminal. There's a fabrication room, pre-fall tier. We can print fresh armor. One of the volunteers retrieved a curved rifle glowing with internal filament. What does this shoot? Let's find out later, Lex said. Preferably not at me. A moment passed. The relay's hum deepened, a low frequency almost felt more than heard. The interface spoke again, softly, almost to itself. Previous tactical imprint, erased. Awaiting new directive. Cycle 004 initiated. A deeper ring pulsed through the relay's foundation, as if the station itself were drawing breath. More lights flickered alive. Sub-chambers unlocked. Data crawled across the hollow spire, schematics of White City defenses, profiles of known Dominion commanders, buried lines of code blinking with unknown syntax. Silas looked around the room, meeting each gaze in turn. We hold this station. We learn what it knows. And when the world comes knocking, we'll answer with more than hope. The group scattered into motion, checking power packs, scanning equipment, unlocking side vaults. In the background, the relay hummed with layered sound, like a machine preparing to breathe. Masrik's earpiece clicked on with a faint burst of coded data. He narrowed his eyes. So that's the plan, Orianthe lingered. Her eyes stayed on Silas. But prepare for what? She asked. Silas met her stare. Prepare to march. March where? He turned back to the holomap. White City pulsed at its center. We march to White City.